So I just want to welcome you all to, again, this Gender-Based Violence Consortium's event, Visualizing Change, Resisting Violence. And so for this first session, I am the moderator. Again, I'm Dr. Isabel Fukushima. So before we get started, though, with our panel, I would like to introduce our colleague, Trinh Mai from the Resiliency Center, who will offer for us a grounding activity to get us started right. So I'm going to stop my screen share and invite Trinh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fukushima. I'm honored to be here and to be with you all. Thank you for the work that you're all doing. So I'm going to do a really short practice, and it's essentially stopping and checking in with yourself. You know, we often check in with our colleagues, our family members, our patients, our students, but we rarely check in with ourselves. And if we could actually just stop, which is the practice we're doing, and check in with ourselves, we can metabolize stress as we go, acknowledge and honor ourselves as we are, and then have the awareness to respond in ways that are intentional and meaningful to us. So this is a practice based on the acronym STOP. S is stop, T is take a few breaths, O is observe openly, and we'll observe some of our internal advisors, so our body, our mind, and our heart. And then P is proceed with intention and compassion, if you wish to add 2 instead of 1. So we'll do this together. And this is invitational. If you have another practice for just allowing yourself a moment to be and to reconnect, please go ahead and do that. But if you'd like to experiment with this, let's do this together. So wherever you are, take the radical step of stopping. So hard in our society. And put your phone, the multitasking, put everything down for just a moment and settle back into a comfortable seat. Perhaps feel your feet on the ground, your seat supported by chair, by the surface, and by gravity itself. And then just feel what it's like to give yourself a moment to stop doing, thinking, problem solving, multitasking. Now taking a few breaths intentionally, so inhaling and feeling that oxygen move through the nostrils, opening up your body. And then exhaling completely. Being with the exhale for as long as you can. And then beginning again. You can always begin again with a new breath. Feeling yourself open with the breath. And then as you exhale, perhaps releasing any muscles that you're holding unnecessarily. So checking in with the jaw, the shoulders, the arms, the stomach, the legs. And now observing openly, how are you? How's your body? Are there areas of tension or tightness, tiredness? And you can acknowledge it, almost like nodding to it, not needing to analyze or judge or fix right now, but just taking an assessment. And then where are the parts of your body that feel at ease? We kind of ignore those parts. So just acknowledging the parts that are quietly working, serving you. And then how's your mind? So you might already be in your mind because the mind is often privileged in our society. So you might be up there, and that's totally normal. But just step out of the traffic of thinking and notice what thoughts are floating by, just to have more awareness, not needing to fix or analyze. Are there plans, memories, opinions? Are there lots of thoughts, just a few? And whatever is there is completely fine. And then finally, are there any emotions connected to all of this right now in your heart and gut? Maybe just check out those spaces. Any energy of anxiety, excitement, impatience, gratitude, or maybe no emotion right now. And then take all of it in with a breath, as if you're accepting yourself, allowing yourself in this moment to be exactly as you are. And then maybe asking, what's important today? Why am I here? What's important? What would I like to experience or learn in this consortium, in this symposium? And then take that in with a breath. At the end of the exhale, you can reconnect with your environment, maybe check out the colors, feel your feet on the ground. And maybe just notice if there's any positive shifts from your efforts, from your radical act of stopping. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fukushima, for allowing me to be here, and yeah, wishing everyone a wonderful day.
Thank you, Trinh, for facilitating that. So wonderful. And it actually really grounded me. So I really appreciate it. I think my energy was like, and then brought me back down into my chair. So thank you for doing that. We're going to now continue on and with another introduction. Actually, I would like to now invite Kristy, Bartley, and Andrea, Donovan to just quickly introduce yourselves to folks here. You can turn off your camera. Turn on your camera, actually, Kristy and Andrea, and just tell folks how they might be able to connect with you and what resources you provide.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Trinh, for that. I echo Annie's experience. I feel much more grounded now. My name is Kristy Bartley, and I'm the clinical coordinator at the Women's Resource Center here on campus. And today I'm providing emotional support for anyone. If you get triggered during this presentation, you can just contact me in the private chat. You'll see that all the participants are listed, and you can just find my name and click on my name if you need help, and I'll be monitoring the chat today. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited that we're doing this, and please feel free to contact me.
Hello, folks. Thank you, Dr. Fukushima. It's an honor to be here with y'all. I'm Andrea Donovan, she, her, hers, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker at Southern Utah University Counseling and Psychological Services. I'm working and living on Paiute land. So I'm honored to be here alongside Kristy for connection after that wonderful grounding activity. And please feel free to reach out to me via private chat. And for folks who may be listening to this event, my name is spelled ANDREADONOVAN. Thank you.
Thank you so much for important support during today's events. And sometimes you might find that actually during the event, we might not need the resources then, and but maybe afterwards you might be feeling things. So see these as important resources for you afterwards. We've also made available on our website how to connect with these very important resources and additional resources as well beyond the University of Utah and SUU. And so please do connect if there are any other additional resources that you don't see on our website that might be helpful for your well-being. Well, hey, let's not wait any further. Let's go ahead and get started. We have fantastic speakers that will be followed by a discussion. And so I'm going to introduce the speaker first with their bio. They will speak. Then I will then introduce the next one. They will speak. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes. When they have 2 minutes left, I will chat that there's 2 minutes left directly to them. And when they are at their time, I will politely interrupt them and let them know that we are nearing time. And so that's just to give an audience a sense of what's going to happen. And so I'd like to introduce, we are so honored to have Ananya Chatterjea, Professor Ananya Chatterjea, who is a 2011 Guggenheim Choreography Fellow, a 2012 McKnight Choreography Fellow, a 2016 Joyce Award recipient, a 2018 UBW Choreographic Center Fellow, and a 2019 Dance USA Artist Fellow. Her Chaturanga Women Weaving Worlds has toured to the Bethlehem International Performing Arts Festival, as well as many other places that you see here before you. She is a professor of dance at the University of Minnesota, where she teaches courses in dance studies and technique. And I was just so honored to have Ananya facilitate a beautiful workshop for Women's Week. And so the University of Utah community is so honored to have this wonderful human being here with us. She's also the author of The Heat and Alterity in Contemporary Dance, South-South Choreographics. So now I'd like to hand it over to Professor Chatterjea.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this beautiful event. I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Dakota Oyate and the Anishinaabe peoples, otherwise known as Mini Shota Makoche. I bring to you something I have learned from my Dakota colleagues, the statement of Mitakuye Oasin, we are all related. I want to simply apologize for wearing sunglasses and not offering direct eye visual energy to you, but I just had eye surgery, so I'm a little bit sensitive to light. So thank you. As you know, in the Twin Cities of Minnesota are really sitting, living here me feels like sitting on a box that is of dry grass that is that can be set in flames at any moment. Here we are, nearing the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. Another young man, Dante Wright, has just been murdered, 20 years old and a father. And then we just received word about the murder of Adam Toledo, not very far from us in Chicago. And every night there has been peaceful protest, but almost always the response has been so harsh that it has triggered different kinds of violences constantly. So it feels like a moment that is full of the potential for everything to blow up and the charge to move forward towards justice despite all of that. As someone who works with dance, an embodied practice, I'm constantly aware of the multiple energies moving through my body at this time. So I bring to you all of that which is sitting on the surface of my cells at this point. There's no way to really process everything and maybe offer a coherent statement. I simply state all of those things because they're moving through at every moment. All right, so I really love, Dr. Fukushima, the way you reminded us about what gender violence is. I'll begin by saying that I come to this work, I work with a company of BIPOC women and femmes who consider themselves cultural activists. So dance is our way of participating in a movement towards justice. And we see this movement as existing on a spectrum of different ways of embodied modes. So this involves participating in direct action, as we have been, and also offering carefully crafted stage performances that bring that raise provocations, that offer provocations to different audiences to think through what might be the ways in which injustice lurks at every corner of our lives. When I began this work, I was in New Jersey, living in New Jersey at that point, and working in collaboration with the South Asian women's movement. And one of the first things I noticed was that at the early Take Back the Night marches, the South Asian women asked for a very particularized visibility for themselves, because the shelters they were bringing, the shelters they were offering, needed to consider that the needs or the responses that were to particular kinds of violences needed particular responses. So the needs of women who identified as Hindu or Muslim at that point and South Asian were just different from what might be thought of as all women's needs. So a specific kind of response was needed. And I think there was pushback. There was pushback from the general movement of Take Back the Night marches for the specificity of these needs. And that sort of planted a seed which has actually become really clear to me over the years. So when I think of gender-based violence, and especially thinking about Dante Wright and Adam Toledo, I say that even as we expand our notion of what gender and who women are, we recognize that when our children are not safe, there is violence against us. When our waters are poisoned, as is happening right now along Line 3 in Palisades, Minnesota, that is gender-based violence. When our food is poisoned by, toxic pesticides or genetic modification without our consent, that is gender-based violence. When we are not free to love who we want to love, that is gender-based violence. When lands are occupied, lands that we may have cultivated, lands that we have lived on, when those are occupied, that is gender-based violence. So I want to really take a minute to broaden the frame of gender-based violence so that we recognize that all issues are actually connected to gender. Women's issues are not just issues that are lived on the bodies of people who identify as women. It's a whole category of women is actually a political category. Gender is a political category, and I ask us to really think carefully about the ways in which power has a certain kind of stickiness, how it sticks to little cells in our bodies and embeds us in the broader power relations of society. I say this as I live on Lake Street, which is one of the thoroughfares of the Twin Cities. And ever since the murder of Dante Wright, it's a return to what happened last summer. Our streets have been filled with Humvees. It's just shocking. It's just the way in which it feels like we are living under a certain kind of occupation. Of course we are, and I am part of that. I'm part of that settler colonialism. But now that occupation has become one which is sponsored by the state and its army vehicles that are at the grocery store, that are at the Target. When we simply go to buy toilet paper, we see them. And it's a reminder of the way in which violence becomes normalized. These sit in our cells. How do we dance from that place is my question. Let me come to this notion of dance and what dance has come to be associated with. Dance is often associated with beauty, reminding us of how we can bring beauty to our daily lives, right? With our bodies, imagining the beautiful flow of energy. Yet it is time for us to really think through what beauty is. When does beauty anesthetize us so we forget to see, we simply allow the flow of beauty to numb our senses to the violences that are, as I say, lurking in every corner of our lives? When can we just simply be inundated by a certain kind of beauty that does not connect itself to justice? It might mean that we need to stop, as was so beautifully asked of us by Trinh Mai this morning. Can we stop and see what is the function of beauty at this point? What is the access to beauty? I also think about power. Marginalized bodies performing power. A really important statement to make at every point, right? Especially when we are thinking about taking back our power. Yet, how much do we need to balance that performance of empowered beings with saying to the state, we push back at this need to always having to strengthen ourselves so you can abdicate your responsibility to us. We are your citizens. Take care of all of your peoples. This is important. So we don't have to always stand up in strength. So we can, again, as was asked of us, simply take a minute to rest. Dr. Fukushima reminded us about visibility. What do we do? What kind of dance is possible when our visibility can actually both, when we can choose visibility and when we can choose opacity, right? Because as BIPOC women and femmes, we swing between this hyper visibility when we have to perform a certain mandate of strength, when we are criminalized, or when pain particularly is spectacularized in such huge ways, as in the pain of, mothers losing their children, as in the pain of Breonna Taylor. So much. There is that. And then there is the corresponding invisibility when we're not seen at all. So as we are constantly pushed to either be hypervisible or invisible, what does the choice in our visibility mean? What does it mean when we choose the stage at a certain moment, when we choose the street corner at a certain moment in a particular way to shape the visibility that we want? Yes, I think I'm going to say that metaphor has been our strength, but there is also another kind of choice. So metaphor is perfect at certain moments when we invite different kinds of audiences to witness our stories and stand behind us. And sometimes the need is to just not be metaphoric, to be as much about the reality, the real rawness of emotions at that moment, because the kind of losses that visit our lives are just impossible to ignore. I say this to all of us as I say to myself that this is, I have studied and practiced the beautiful traditional art form of Odissi, a traditional dance form from the state of Odisha. And yet that beauty has allowed us to not see the kind of violences that have been visited by the state on Dalit communities there. This is the month of the Ambedkar Jayanti. Baba Ambedkar was one of the important Dalit leaders of our country. I hold up Baba Ambedkar at this moment. Caste violence is also gender violence. And I hold up the violence that is resisted by Dalit and Bahujan communities in the country in which I was born and raised. And I hold up the pushback by powerful BIPOC women and femmes in the country in which I now live and work, in celebration of gender empowerment. I'm going to stop here for right now and ask Dr. Fukushima to offer any thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. We look forward to being in conversation with you at the end. We'll do conversation after we've heard from our other speakers. That was so beautiful. I captured so many wonderful things that you were saying about how dance is a way to move towards justice. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'd like to now invite our next speaker to join us. Our next speaker is Yolanda Francisco-Nez, who is Navajo or Diné from the Navajo Diné tribe. She is the executive director of Restoring Ancestral Winds, served 4 years as a board chair of the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, helped to establish Navajo Nation Council Sexual Assault Prevention Working Group to address child abduction, sexual violence, and trafficking, received special recognition for her achievements from the Navajo Nation Council, co-authored reports on discrimination, women's rights, and excessive use of force, and has played a significant role in being the first city to pass legislation to protect LGBTQI2S from employment discrimination. And so she's been involved in those efforts as well. So now I would like to invite Yolanda Francisco-Nez to turn on her mic and to turn on her camera. And I'm going to go ahead and do screen share of her slides for her.
Good morning, everyone. Yate, Yolanda Francisco-Nez, Yinshia, Kabahanshledo, Na Kaidana Bashichin, Tsao Tsuide Nasha. I am the executive director of Restoring Ancestral Winds, and I am very happy and pleased to be here this morning. I sent a quick message to my mom, Shema, and thanked her for the path she laid for me as a matrilineal society, giving her respect and gratitude for laying the path at her alma mater, the University of Utah School of Social Work. So today we're going to talk a bit about the missing and murdered Indigenous people in Utah, colonization, trauma, and violence. Go ahead and go to the next slide. First, I'm going to share with you a bit about I'm going to talk about who we are and our little organization located here in Sandy, Utah. Restoring Ancestral Winds' mission is to support healing in our Indigenous communities. We will advocate for healthy relationships, educate our communities on issues surrounding stalking, trafficking, domestic, sexual, dating, and family violence. We'll collaborate with Great Basin community members and stakeholders, honor and strengthen traditional values of all our relations. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about IPV. It's referred to as IPV, interpersonal, intimate partner violence, and how that is defined is abuse or aggression that occurs in a romantic relationship. Intimate partner often refers to both current and former spouses and dating partners. IPV can vary in how often it happens and how severe it is. It can range from one episode of violence that could have lasting impact to chronic and severe episodes over multiple years. IPV includes 4 different types of behavior, and I'm not going to go into all of this, but the 4 are physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression. It's often also referred to as sometimes as domestic violence and dating violence as well. But it's these other forms of, it's connected to those forms of violence, but also it's related to serious health issues and economic consequences. Next slide. So we're going to talk about how intimate partner violence affects those who are living in Indian country. And that particular wording, Indian country, is an official word of the US government referring to Native Americans and indigenous people as Indians. Next. I do want to offer a disclaimer that all data presented here is the best imperfect data available to understand how violence operates in Indigenous communities, unless it otherwise states. Next. Did we skip one? There we go. So there are 2 studies that I'm going to talk about quickly. One is the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which was published in, the work was, state report was done between 2010 and 2012. It notes that with few exceptions, racial and ethnic minority women bear the greatest burden of victimization of sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence, making targeted public health prevention programming critical. Specific patterns indicate that American Indian and Alaskan Native women and men tend to have elevated prevalence estimates compared to other racial and ethnic groups. So racial and ethnic minority communities may be exposed to a number of stressors, such as low income, less access to education, employment, and community resources that likely contribute to their risk for experiencing violence. Next. So to give you an overview of these experiences, I'll share with you this overview that includes Native people who experience violence in their lifetime. You'll see here that about 84.3% of females experience violence, and 81.6% experience violence, those who are male. Of sexual violence, we have 56.1% of female and 27.5% of male. And I'll let you read through those other statistics as we continue to move forward in this presentation. You'll see that, let's go back. Oh, thank you. Relative to white women, Native women are 1.2 times as likely to experience violence in their lifetime. And relative to white men, Native men are 1.3 times as likely to experience violence in their lifetime. Native men are more likely to have experienced violence by an interracial perpetrator, and significantly less likely to have experienced violence by an intraracial perpetrator. We'll go to the next slide. So Of physical violence, 55% of American Indian and Alaska Native women and 43.2% of American Indian and Alaska Native men have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner. Next. You'll see here in the graph shown that over a lifetime of physical violence, these are the types of violence that Native American men and women have experienced. And then the view that you have of the right side of that screen is physical violence by intimate partner perpetrators, where you have that interracial and intraracial with Native American female and male and white female and male. You'll see the incredible difference that exists with 90% female and 85% male of interracial violence. And then you have lower numbers of white, female, and male, respectively. So let's go to the next slide. So our organization has a very, I think, a unique take in working with our Indigenous Two-Spirit LGBTQI community. And we feel like it's very important as a tribal coalition to give, to uplift the voice of those who are also deeply affected by violence. So of the Indigiqueer, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQI, there was another report that is the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs in a 2016 study noted that 15 IPV homicides and 2,032 reports of IPV occurred. 19% experienced physical violence. In a transgender survey in 2015, K through 12, 49% were physically attacked. And then also the Diné Policy Institute in 2015 published a report as well, noting that 18% of Navajo people experienced physical violence in the last 6 months. Next. So now let's talk about, we explored physical violence. Now I'd like to explore sexual violence. Next. So what we know is that over a lifetime, sexual violence that occurs with penetration among our Native American females is at 35%, with about 10.8% male. And we know that among white people, female is 20.1%, with males at 5.1%. So you'll see underneath that also other forms of violence that I won't go into because I'd like to spend more time toward the end of this. You can take a look there and see that at the very bottom that any sexual violence among females is 56.1% versus females at 49, white women are at 49.7. Close, very close in percentages there. So let's go to the next slide. Among our Indigiqueer, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQI population, we have the report noted earlier in the 2016 study that 7% experienced sexual violence in 2016. In the transgender survey, in 2015, it notes that 24% of our community K through 12 were sexually assaulted, and 65% were sexually assaulted of adults. The Diné Policy Institute, among the Navajo study, 20% experienced sexual assault in the last 6 months. Next. Stalking is a form of violence, as you may know, and we have about 48.8% of Native women and 18.6% of Native men who experience stalking in their lifetime. Next. So I'm just going to show you quickly this graph here. The Native American victims who experience stalking over a lifetime, that is an incredibly high number of who receive unwanted phone calls, female at 82.1% and 75.3% for men. And then you have stalking by an intimate partner and perpetrators who are interracial and intraracial among Native American females and males, and also white people who are female and male. You'll see those differences there. You can see that 90% among interracial is much higher among our white people than Native American males at 23%. Next. So among our, again, our indigiqueer, two-spirit, and LGBTQI community, we have in this study that trans are 2.5 times more likely to be stalked compared to Native survivors who are not trans, and trans who are 2 times more likely to experience online harassment, with about 2% experiencing online harassment. The Diné Policy Institute in 2015 noted that 24% of Navajo were followed or chased in the last 6 months. Next. So another form of violence is also that of psychological aggression. So among American Indian and Alaska Native, 66, of course, I meant women, Native women, 66.4% have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And 25.5% have experienced it in the past year. Among the American Indian and Alaska Native men, 73% have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and 23.3% have experienced it in the past year. Next. I'll let you observe this particular slide on the psychological aggression by an intimate partner. You'll see among the graph here is the expressive aggression among female and male Native Americans versus the 44.2% of female and 35.3% male experiencing expressive aggression. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can take a look at those numbers and you'll see some very significant differences, in particular among the interracial female and also the white female. That is a large difference, 91% versus 22% respectively. Next. We'll go near, okay, good here. So now with all these numbers, what do we do with this? I want to just go into conclusion here with 1 minute left. What is it that leads to all of this? We have a much longer presentation that we offer on several reasons why, but I'm going to go, if you would just go to the next slide. These are some of the reasons. Next. So what we have is that I want to just end with this. That is that in the recent legislative, Utah legislative session, Representative Angela Romero passed a bill that she sponsored on continuing the work of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls here in Utah. That is set to begin over in June, and will be a task force that is formed and will meet about 7 times and submit a report of recommendations to the legislature. And so I'm sorry we couldn't go through each of the rest of those slides, but I am happy to talk about this further. And again, thank you, Dr. Fukushima, for allowing us to participate and inviting Restoring Ancestral Winds to be part of this discussion. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and they give so many wonderful presentations that I hope you really do follow and support Restoring Ancestral Winds. They have a lot of presentations that they give in the community that folks should really be checking out and to expand our knowledge and how we are working in collaboration with our Native communities. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Liliana Olvera-Arbon, who is the Executive Director for the Coalition Against Sexual Assault. She joined UCASA over a year ago with over 10 years of experience working in social services, demonstrating profound leadership while working at Los Angeles-based Rape Crisis Center and later a program coordinator at the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Liliana's vision is to center and uplift the voices of communities marginalized by society and bring a deep commitment towards social equity and collective liberation. She is dedicated to educating people of their rights and opportunities and envisions a world free of gender-based violence. Now I would like to invite Liliana to unmute her microphone and her camera.
Thank you, Annie. Can you hear me?
I can hear you wonderfully. It's so wonderful to see your face.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to sharing space and information with all of you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can present my slides. Okay. Thank you again for having me. My name, like Annie mentioned, or Dr. Fukushima, is Liliana, and I am the Executive Director for the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And I am extremely honored to again share space and time with you all in today's discussion around ending gender-based violence. And so with that, I recognize always the incredible work that the mothers of this movement and those who've participated in this movement have placed and have done to provide a space for me to also be in this space with you all and in this position of leadership at the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And I want to recognize my grandmother and mother who my grandmother taught me to be strong, taught me to stand up and against the injustices that we saw, and that my mother taught me to be empathetic, to be caring, and to see people for who they were. And so without their teachings, without their enseñanzas, I would not be who I am today. So I honor them and I thank them for guiding me to the point where I am today. I want to talk a little bit about who the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault is and what we do, and kind of provide a quick overview of our programs. We definitely provide training and technical assistance around the state of Utah with webinars, publications. We also provide a 40-hour training for all victim advocates who are starting their work around victim services. We do and started with Rape Recovery Center a year and a half ago, the very first Spanish 40-hour training here in our state. So very, not too long ago, we provided that training together. UCASA continues to lead by providing that Spanish training for our communities. And of course, we do one-on-one training for those interested in knowing more and interested in creating space for understanding trauma response and understanding what best practices or promising practices are available to better serve survivors of sexual violence. We also do a lot of prevention work, engaging men in the anti-violence movement and working with young women of color as well. And of course, our sexual assault nurse examiner program, where our nurses train nurses across the state of Utah to provide trauma-informed collection evidence of when survivors are reporting at the hospital. So creating a cohesive way to respond to this, a way where folks are able to connect with our 3 SANE nurses on ways to better support survivors during the forensic collection part and medical support. And we also have rural programming where we serve sexual assault victims, survivors, secondary survivors, family members, anyone impacted by violence in rural communities such as Tooele, Duchesne, Daggett, and Uintah County. So Yolanda shared some of those statistics as well, and I'd like to share a little bit more of what we know about sexual assault in Utah. We know 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. We know 1 in 6 men will experience some form of sexual violence. 1 in 2 trans individuals will be sexually assaulted. Rape is the only violent crime in Utah that occurs at a higher rate than the rest of the nation. And remembering that these numbers are only based on those that have reported. And we understand that rape is one of the most underreported crimes. Now, I'd like to kind of move into understanding the pandemic, right? The immense necessity for us to think about sexual violence within marginalized communities. We had Yolanda share about the Native community. 56.1% of Native Americans have been victimized of sexual violence. More than 20% of Black women have been victims of rape. According to the Institute of Women's Policy, people who identify as Latinx, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, or mixed race are also overrepresented as victims of sexual assault. So that really brings us to understanding that, sorry, I'm gonna go back. To be marginalized means to be pushed aside. It is there at the edges that perpetrators of sexual violence often seek their victims, counting on societal blind spots to protect and perpetrate their transgressions. People of color disproportionately represent victims of sexual violence. Inequities tend to intersect, creating webs of disenfranchisement that can be hard to escape. And so we recognize that here at UCASA, and we work towards educating communities to understand that survivors of communities of color, of marginalized community, have added barriers to reporting, to seeking access, to healing, ultimately to healing from the violence that they have encountered. So what we do at UCASA, our approach is really looking at kind of our framework is a 3-prong approach. We do individual program support, a community and institutional level, and collective power. Statistics reveal that far too many people from marginalized communities become targets of sexual violence. What these figures do not accurately reflect, however, are the actual number of victims, like we shared in those statistics earlier. Sexual violence against disenfranchised community is thought to be greatly underreported for all of the barriers that I shared before. Now, this framework that UCASA really centers is a way to look at ending sexual violence and envisioning a world free from sexual violence. And we start with the individual program level support. We are extremely focused on finding ways to better support marginalized communities. Audre Lorde says it best by saying there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issued lives. That is so true for our communities. That is so true for each one of us, that we need to look at survivors as a whole, what represents that survivor, what composes that survivor. So our program and individual support focus on centering survivors, supporting programs that serve victims across the state of Utah, ensuring that they are intentional in their work and reaching out to the most vulnerable. Doing first responders trainings, which means that we all have the responsibility to know how to believe, how to work, how to support a survivor when they're telling us that they've been victimized. We do, like I shared earlier, SANE education, that programs within our state understand how to support survivors and how to understand the different complexities and intersections that represent that survivor, and that we continually talk about and educate around the access of medical care when someone has been victimized due to sexual violence. Our second approach is really focused on community and institutional change, promoting policies that support safe environments. Recently, we worked with Representative Romero, the Rape Recovery Center, on the Prison Rape Elimination Act. The Prison Rape Elimination Act was enacted in 2011 or 2012 as a way to enact standards where those that were in detention had access to support, but also looking at ways to detect, prevent sexual violence from happening within these systems. In the United States, in our very own state of Utah, there is an overrepresentation of communities of color. We know, like we shared earlier with statistics, that our communities of color, our marginalized group, have higher rates of sexual violence and oftentimes do not report and seek services. And so what this means, what this legislation for us in Utah meant, was that Utah was one of 2 states in the nation that was not in compliance with serving incarcerated survivors of violence. And so this legislation is enacting this so that we can look at ways to better serve those who are disenfranchised and are in our facilities. Again, creating more access to communities, to victim services for those that are underrepresented within the work that we are doing. We also look at institutional change by building leaders, youth leaders within our community. UCASA has introduced Mujeres Utah contra la Violencia, Utah, an acronym for Unidas Triunfando Adelante Holísticamente, that we know that community is empowered and should be empowered to find ways to heal, and that by building these leaders, they can and will have the resources to heal from sexual violence. And we also engage with men, that we know that men also play a part in ending violence, and we call them to action by joining in conversations on how they can upstand, be part of this movement to end violence, and how they can be a voice of change within our communities as well. And lastly, collective power. We at UCASA are creating a movement that requires all of us to join and to be an active participant in ending gender-based violence. To really engage in this work, there needs to be both individual and collective change and an understanding of the dominant forces of our culture. Members of the dominant culture or institution should be engaging in this work for other people as well as for themselves. Conversations around oppression and inclusivity are about everyone's freedom. We need to increase our consciousness to reveal our own unconscious biases and unrecognized privileges of identities from the dominant culture. We seek to transform the underlying conditions that result in domination, extraction, and violence, and towards a vision of a world rooted in interdependence, resilience, and sustainability. We cannot, and I cannot say this enough, do this work alone. It requires the collective. It requires envisioning a world free from sexual violence. It requires us to think, what is our purpose or distinct role in services of the vision as a collaborative, What values do we need to move away from a society, and what values do we need to move towards? We are celebrating and talking and doing a lot of work around Sexual Assault Awareness Month today in April. We must look beyond Sexual Assault Awareness Month and make this an everyday effort in order to end sexual violence. We all are deeply interconnected as human beings, and any social change benefits all of us. We are honored to be part of a movement that looks at elevating those that have and historically have been underserved. And we are inviting all of you to look at ways that you can contribute to this collective power by looking at ways that you start looking at ending violence. Remembering that we are in this together, we may have moments where we may fall short, but if we connect, understand, and uplift and believe survivors and create that systemic change or that paradigm shift that we are always talking about, we can achieve this as a collective power. Thank you, Annie.
Wow, so wonderful. Thank you so much. I think our institution can learn so much from you and have learned so much from you about your models of social change, of working to to change institutions and create collective response. So beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm now going to invite our last speaker, and we will then go into a conversation after our last speaker joins us. So now I'd like to invite Keith Squires, who is the Interim Chief Safety Officer at the University of Utah. He has served in Governor Gary Herbert's cabinet as a Utah Commissioner of Public Safety, retiring in September 2018 after 31 years of service. He holds a master's degree in Homeland Defense and Security from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School and a bachelor's degree in Administration of Criminal Justice. And he's also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. So I'd like to now invite Keith to unmute yourself and to turn on your camera. Sorry, that's what I meant to say.
Thank you, Annie. And this has been wonderful. I'm very fortunate to have been invited to join you this morning, especially with such other distinguished speakers and the information that's being shared. I'd like to start out by introducing myself. My name's Keith Squires. I began my career in law enforcement and public safety way back in the late 1980s. But over the years, I've had just tremendous experiences, many rough days, a lot of tragic situations that I've been involved with. But I've been very fortunate that over those years, I've had a chance to also see change. I've had a chance to see where police work and public safety services needed to be advanced, needed to be better realized in the opportunities of doing things different. And despite the challenges that we have right now that are going on around the country and also here in Utah, as it's in regard to the police and how policing is done, I think that the value from this is that it's serving as a catalyst, one that's allowing us to make changes that normally don't happen in the timely fashion that they should. And so in that way, it's a good thing. As I served in my previous career of public safety, I was with the Utah Department of Public Safety. I was able to serve in various roles and all of the different positions and ranks of that department, and finished the last 5 years of my career serving as Governor Herbert's Commissioner of Public Safety, overseeing the department. And that includes the state police, the Utah Highway Patrol, State Bureau of Investigation, as well as the other public safety services, emergency management, even driver's license division, and others. One of the things that I was able to be involved in that I think genuinely ties into what we're discussing today is an opportunity that I had about almost 5 years ago. For the first time in our state agency, I was able to take a couple positions that the legislature was giving us that could have been used for trooper positions, police officers. And we were able to use those to employ a social worker and 2 victims advocates. And so the thing that I recognized at the onset, but also we managed through it, was the resistance the change might bring as far as the culture and just the way that police usually do business or have been trained. But what I found from being able to combine those teams is that it didn't take too long once they were interacting and understanding what each other brings to the situation, a level of response that we had never seen before, one that gives us other options than the traditional ways that we've policed or responded to calls or dealt with individuals who are in crisis. And I know that that's the future, but it has been a slow move. And in our state, with the number of departments there still are not near as many, very few, in fact, that are doing this. At the University of Utah, well, I retired from the state, as I said, about 2.5 years ago. And it was very shortly after I retired that I received a phone call from President Watkins at the university. And she asked if I would be available and able to assist as part of an independent investigation team looking into the tragic murder of Lauren McCluskey on campus, and the university's police department and other departments in their response to Lauren's requests and needs. And I was fortunate that my employer at that time was able to give me leave, and I was able to spend about 1.5 months on that investigation. And specifically, my role was focusing in on the police response and those interviews of all involved there. But you know, I was also given right from the beginning, I was made known that there was no expectation to follow the information, and I served without compensation. So it was truly an independent opportunity for us to look at everything and present our findings along with some recommendations. And so those recommendations were about 30, but it was very meaningful. Of all the things that I've been involved in my career, Lauren's circumstances, she was not unlike any of our family members, people that we know that begin their university and college experiences, but found herself in a situation that was very scary, and she was seeking help. And the toughest part about it is when you investigate something like that, is that you look at every aspect and you realize that where there were opportunities And there were practices that should have been followed and incorporated into the way that we do our work, and that had they been incorporated the way they should have, would have made a difference in the outcome. And so that has, like a few other incidents in my career, really inspired me to look for ways that I can contribute still and help make those changes in a healthy way, and help others to be able to look outside of what we normally do, and how we provide police services to our communities, all of our communities. Of those recommendations that we made, I am excited to report that some great changes have been in place this past year, especially. About a year ago, my predecessor, Marlon Lynch, who was the first chief safety officer for the University of Utah, was able to come in and change the structure of the police department. Instead of everything rolling up into the police chief, which can tend to cause everything as part of that to be police-centric, he leveled that structure out. He created other positions and elevated them to directors, such as our security services director, both on main campus and with UHealth, but also our community support services director. And that is a team of 3 right now that have social work and victims advocate experience and expertise. And we are in the process now at the University of Utah of developing a joint response protocol and having those teams be able to work together, as I described from my experience also with the Utah Department of Public Safety. And so I'm very excited to be involved with that. And we are starting to make good progress. And I expect that we will be in a situation very soon where that is working and taking advantage not only of our team, but other resources that are available to us through the university. The other thing I want to mention is that in August of last year, President Watkins created 2 committees to be part of university safety and work with us. One is the Independent Review Committee, and the other is the Public Safety Advisory Committee. Both of these committees are comprised of members of our community represented by students, faculty, and staff. I'll first just mention the IRC, the Independent Review Committee, because this is something also that is very unique, not only in Utah, but I believe across the country. At this point, they have been, since August of last year, this committee, reviewing every complaint that comes in on any of our personnel. And so that, as you can imagine, can be anything from rudeness up to dereliction of duty, excessive force, anything that anyone brings forward. Some of those complaints have even come in from within the department by others, which is also a healthy sign when you have a culture where individuals are sharing information. But the Independent Review Committee is working. They're very thoughtful in the way that they look at each complaint, and then they're able to advise back not only to me, but to the university president, any recommendations. They're helping us with policy considerations, training issues, and that's going to be a positive for the future. The Public Safety Advisory Committee, also comprised of faculty, staff, and students, is an advisory to the chief safety officer. Our meeting next week, as just for an example, is looking at the required notifications that go out on campus when certain incidents happen related to the Clery Act, and what we are looking for is their insight as recipients of those notifications on how we may improve that, to be able to not only how we put the notifications out, but how we follow up and communicate information to them that helps them understand that the situation's now resolved, or that it's safe to proceed. So those are some key things. Another thing I'd like to mention is a great innovation. About 6 months ago, gentleman, Brian Nichols, who comes to us with 10 years experience at the university, having been in the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, is now serving as a senior advisor to the Chief Safety Officer. And Brian has a dotted line in his responsibilities, but he also works weekly with the Office of Student Affairs, as well as the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And so what that gives us is a chance to make sure that everything that we are working on is considerate of ways for us to address issues and incidents of racist biased incidents, as well as making sure that our services are coordinated. And so another great innovation that I'm very excited about. Lastly, I just wanted to mention, there's a lot of things going on. Another personal experience that I had, again, about 5 years ago. In my previous position at the Utah Department of Public Safety, we also had responsibility for policing on the Salt Lake Community College campus. And so at that time, I had a couple sexual assaults that had taken place on campus that we were working, that we were, doing all we could to identify the suspects and resolve that, to get help for the victims. But what I recognized, and there was also some other incidents on the news from other parts of the state and on other campuses, but was that there was a need for us to have more of a proactive effort to help, especially all students, but especially young women coming onto campus, to understand some of the hazards that may be there, to understand situational awareness better, and to have some understanding to help with their safety in going into that new environment. And my family was also, at ages where I was able to talk to them and their friends, and found that really what we had was a chance here, the same as in law enforcement. If you have thought about something beforehand and had some training on it, you're more inclined to be able to react to it. So I'll finish up here by just letting you know that we were able to bring a program here and started in Utah that is at the Salt Lake Community College that is really making a difference. And thank you.
Thank you so much. And so interesting to think about institutional change in the face of so many of our community's needs.